teacher, and Master Quang here, he's been with me about 10 years, and he did a lot of study. And so I tell him to share the Dharma knowledge with all of you. So now he takes turn to do the Dharma talk with me. 1 week I do Dharma talk, 1 week Master Quang do Dharma talk. And the Vietnamese session, 1 week I do Dharma talk, 1 week the nun do the Dharma talk. So today is the turn for Master Quang to do the Dharma talk today.
Before we begin the Dharma talk, please join me in invoking the Buddha's name 3 times. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha, Namo Shakyamuni Buddha, Namo Shakyamuni Buddha, Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. So, for today's Dharma talk, a couple weeks ago I started a discussion on impermanence and suffering as told by the First Noble Truth. So, for my sessions going forward, I'll continue on discussions of the Four Noble Truths, and go down to the Eightfold Path eventually. So for the First Noble Truth that we discussed the last session that I talked about, the First Noble Truth is suffering. Life is suffering, right? And we discussed the variation of some of the translations of dukkha, which is suffering. And so the best way for us to understand it, to be able to learn it, is to change the way that we speak or think of suffering, which is quite a bit. So when I discuss suffering, I always say that in life there is suffering, not that life is suffering, right? Because life is not always suffering, but in our life, all the goods and all the bads, there is some suffering. So my translation of dukkha is in life there is suffering. And then the second noble truth is the origin of suffering. The third noble truth is the way out of suffering. And the fourth noble truth is the Eightfold Path, the way to escape that suffering, life of suffering. So for the second noble truth we're discussing today is the origin of suffering. And so the origin of suffering, as taught by the Buddha, is desire. But more specifically is the attachment to desire, right? And so when we think in a mundane sense of what desire is, we're thinking, oh, I have desire to have a good job, to have a nice house, to have a running car, to have a family, to have a whatever it is, right? Which is okay. We're not saying that having desires is bad, but there are good desires and there are bad desires, right? What causes life to suffering for us is the attachment that we have to certain bad desires, right? Yesterday during our meditation class, we were talking about the fifth of the 5 hindrances, which was doubt. And we were discussing how doubt can cause some self-doubt, some frustration in our practice when we're not feeling so worthy of what we're doing in meditation practice, right? We doubt what we know. We doubt that we're doing anything correctly. We doubt that are we doing the right method, the right technique, etc. And part of that discussion was saying how the Buddha said that just because a great master, a great sage, a great teacher of the royals, a great teacher of a village, a great teacher of high ministers, even the Buddha, myself, the Tathagata, even though I have said something, you do not have to believe it, right? Put it into practice. Put it into your daily life. Does it work for you? If it works for you, that's great. If it doesn't work for you, that's fine. Move on to something different, right? And so part of that is acknowledging that as you go through things, as you go through the practice, right? And one way to see if it's a good practice or a good teaching is to contemplate the outcome of it, right? So if you're practicing something, if you're learning something, if it develops compassion, if it develops kindness, if it develops peace and freedom, then it's a good teaching, right? Not just in Buddhism, but in any teaching in life. But if it does the opposite and brings up feelings of anger or greed or jealousy or any other negative feeling, then it's then you can conclude that it's not a good teaching, right? So that's how we take on our practice in Buddhism as well, right? So one thing that the Buddha did really well in his lifetime, right? He taught for over 40-ish years. The one thing that he did very well is teach the same Dharma in different ways, right? Because his audience were always different people. So if he were giving a talk to highly educated people or the ministers or the royal court, then he would speak in a way that educated people would understand. If he were speaking to the servants or to people in poor villages and whatnot, then he would teach them in a way that they are capable of understanding, right? So we have thousands of discourses. We have hundreds of sutras. And a lot of them are repetitive, but they're taught in different ways. Because you may learn better in a simpler, more down-to-earth kind of explanation versus something that's pretty complex or pretty, philosophical or psychological, right? And so as we go through the Four Noble Truths, you will see a description almost completely different in every text that you read, right? There's no one definition of the Four Noble Truths. Because like everything else, there are different variations, there's different styles, there's different techniques and ways to approach it and to learn it and to accept it and to contemplate it and to put it into action. So when we're discussing desire here, desire isn't necessarily the desire in Buddhism as the second noble truth isn't things like, oh, I want a good job, or I want to have money, or I want to be successful, or I want the family, etc., etc. It's not those kinds of desires, right? So it's not about identifying with the desire in any way, but about recognizing those desires, because there are bad desires, right? And so the bad desires are the ones that may cause harm to you or to others, right? Sometimes we want things so bad that we forget about some of the consequences that they may cause, right? Sometimes if we're in a job and we are just eager to get promoted or eager to rise up, we may do things that we may later regret, right? We start throwing people under the bus, or we start making up fictional numbers or whatever it is that we do in a job to make ourselves look better, right? So we're manipulating the truth, we're changing the truth, we're essentially putting people down in order for us to get ahead, right? So that's the type of desire that we need to look out for. But the desire itself isn't what causes suffering, right? The desire of you wanting to get promoted or to have a better job isn't the suffering. It's the attachment to that desire that causes the suffering, right? It's the attachment that you feel like you have to do so much, you have to ruin so many people's lives, you have to put so many people under the bus in order to get what you want. That's the bad part we need to look for, right? And sometimes it's very subtle and we can't always recognize it, right? But that's why when we read something new in Buddhism, when we read a new teaching or we hear a new teaching, right? One of the best ways to truly apply that in your life is by contemplation, by meditating on that teaching, right? Because if you read something face value, you may either accept it or you don't accept it. And if you do accept it, then you're like, okay, cool, I know this now. And if you don't accept it, then you're like, oh, that's cool, that doesn't work for me. You don't apply it to your life, right? But the correct way to actually learn it is through meditation, is through contemplating that teaching when you're meditating, right? There are many different methods of meditation, but one of the two main methods in Buddhism, Buddhist meditation, is concentration and contemplation. So the contemplation part is when we start contemplating that teaching that we've learned. We start dissecting the teaching. We start to pull it apart and to try to find its root teachings, its true teachings, right? We try to see what it's actually trying to tell us, right? And as we start dissecting that truth, or dissecting the teaching and seeing what it's really trying to tell us, then it's easier for us to accept it and easier for us to apply it to our life, right? And so if we are in a situation where we catch ourselves being attached in some way, shape, or form, right, there's a difference between letting go and getting rid of when it comes to attachments. Because sometimes we think that, oh, if I just threw away this book, burned it, if I tore its pages, if I threw it in the trash, if I got rid of it, my attachment to the book would go too. But that's not the case, usually, right? This book is useful. It's full of Dharma teachings. It's full of commentary. It's full of good resources, right? So I don't have to get rid of it to get rid of the attachment, right? The attachment isn't in the book. The attachment is me not wanting anything to happen to the book. But if I'm able to recognize the attachment that I have towards the book and see it for what it really is, and I can set the book down, I can put it away, and I can just leave it without any aversion toward it, without any desire to hang on to it, to cling to it 24/7, because it's such a precious book, right? So when you're able to accept some of those subtle desires that we have in life, it's easier to let those things go, right? And desire comes in many different forms, right? We're attached to the car that we have. We're attached to the house that we live in. We're attached to the people that are in our lives, to our spouses, to our children, to our jobs, to our money, to our possessions. We're attached to everything, really, right? And what happens when we lose some of those things? What happens when something breaks or something disappears? We get hurt. We're disappointed. We're sad, right? Our house burned down, maybe, I don't know. Our car got totaled. Our new phone broke, right? Someone broke up with me. I broke up with them. Someone passed away. The feelings that we have after this, right? If we are so mentally attached to those things, then we feel so much suffering. Like, I can't believe this happened to me. I can't believe my phone broke. I just bought it. My car, I just bought it, got totaled. My dream home got burnt down. The person that I love passed away. And then we start blaming other things. We blame the weather. We blame people running into us. We blame God or whoever it is, right? We start playing the blame game when really the problem is us. It's our mentality, our attachment to those things, right? So if you are so unattached to it, we're not so unattached to it, but if you're able to see it for what it really is and accept that life is change, life is impermanent, right? Nothing can last forever. This is a beautiful new temple, but how long is it really going to last? 200 years, 300 years, maybe not even 100 years, we don't know, right? But if we're able to accept that one day it will not be here anymore, that one day things will start crumbling, the paint will start peeling, statues may fall over, whatever it may be. If we're able to see that that is a possibility, that that is just part of life, then it's not so hard to accept when it happens. But other than seeing things for what they are, right? Our basic deep-seated craving here is just wanting things to be different than what they are, right? because that's as we discussed before when we were discussing impermanence, is because we cling to things and not wanting them to change, that when they do change is when we have that suffering, right? We have this mentality that things can't change. We just don't want it to change. We love it as perfectly as they are, right? When we have new puppies, we don't want them to get older. When we have children, we don't want them to get older, right? We have a new job, we never want it to change. When we have new friends, we never want them to go away or move on, right? We always want things as we want them because we enjoy them in that moment. And so when it changes or when something happens, then we get disappointed, we get sad, we get frustrated, we get angry, right? And so, but that desire isn't just the only cause of our suffering, right? The ultimate cause of our suffering is our ignorance toward understanding impermanence, right? And then the clinging to the concept of I, or the ego, right? It's a whole different topic of when we discuss like the self or the ego or the I in Buddhism. It's a huge topic all on its own. So we won't discuss that right now. But a quick summary of that is this ego that we have, right? This I, the mentality that is deeply rooted with us, is what ultimately attempts to identify us as a person, right? Our ego tells us you have to be this type of person, you have to act a certain way, you have to dress a certain way, you have to be a certain way, you have to make so much money, you have to have so many kids, you have to have so many houses or cars or whatever it is, right? This ego is there telling us how to view things, how to believe things, how to see things. And so when something happens to us, right, our ego is there to defend it. I always give the example when we're driving and someone cuts us off, right? That's my favorite example because I feel like I give it every time. But when someone cuts us off in traffic, what typically happens? We get angry, right? We start flipping them off. We start cussing them out. We may even attempt to speed up and cut them off too. But in any of those situations, what may happen? If you do speed up and cut them off, then you're driving recklessly and you have the potential to cause an accident. And that accident is going to hurt you. It's going to hurt that other person. It may even kill somebody. You don't know, right? But because our ego is saying, hey, you need to defend yourself. How dare they cut you off? You're more important than they are. Your time is more precious, right? And so if we're able to get away from that thought process that our ego is better than everyone else, then it's easier for us to kind of accept things, let them go, right? If we're able to accept, okay, that person cut me off, maybe they're in a hurry, maybe someone's in the back seat about to give birth, something, we don't know, right? But what happens is we make up a story for them to make ourselves feel better, to allow the situation, allow what we do next to happen, right? We create this false story that they're a terrible person and they deserve to be cut off too, so we speed up and cut them off, or whatever it may be, right? But that's typically what happens. But if we're able to stop and think and recognize that thought process as it's happening, then we can stop the negative thinking that may occur. We can stop the negative, harsh speech that we may say. And ultimately, we can stop the actions that we do, right? Because everything starts as a thought. When we do things, everything starts as a thought. I want to eat. Then you say out loud, I'm hungry. And then you go actually eat, physically eat, right? So everything's in the thought first. Everything's in our mind first. So if you're able to recognize and be mindful and be aware of certain bad thinking or bad thoughts, then it's easier to abstain from saying something wrong or say something bad or saying something you may later regret. If you're not able to stop at that moment, and if you do say something, then you have another opportunity to stop yourself from if you're able to recognize after you've said something, then you can stop yourself from doing that action, right? So you have multiple steps in the process of thinking, saying, and doing to stop something bad from happening or negative something negative from happening, right? But as long as we have this idea of how things should be, of how people should be, of how people should act and be and think and believe, as long as we have those desires for them and for other things to be something different than what they are, then we're always going to be disappointed in life. We're always going to have some sort of suffering, right? But one type of suffering and desire that everyone shares is expectations, right? And I think I've talked about expectations before. But as long as we have expectations of how someone else should be, or how you should be, or how people should act, what they should be believing in, and when things don't go our way or go the way that we want them to, then again, we're disappointed, we're sad, we're frustrated, right? Because you have this expectation of how life should be, of how people should be. And when it doesn't go your way, then you kind of like just get your butt hurt, basically, right? So, because our expectations of how we think life should be, it drives the advice that we give, right? And the opinions that we have and the beliefs that we hold. So if we're able to recognize that these expectations or having these false expectations may ultimately hurt us in a way, then we're able to stop having so many expectations, right? Like desire, it's okay to have a desire for success. It's okay to have a desire to have a family or have a good job or have a good education, right? So there's still good desire, and expectations kind of the same way too, right? You can have small expectations, but not expectations where if someone doesn't do something that you want them to, or someone doesn't believe something that you believe in, and then what happens then, right? You didn't get the promotion you want, so now you're upset. Someone has different political views, and now it's a whole argument. Nobody texted you back, and now you're offended, right? Someone's driving slowly, and now you're frustrated. But what is that? That's reality catching up to your expectations, and because they don't coincide, now you're suffering, right? But not everyone's going to agree. Not everyone can get that promotion. Not everyone, texts get forgotten, and some people are just slow drivers, right? So as long as we can get out of the habit of wanting things to be the way we want them to be, then you have less chance of suffering, right? And remember last time when we spoke about suffering is not just physical hurt, right? When we hear the word suffering, we tend to think of torture or murder or whatever, right? Like some big deal. But suffering comes in many different ways, in different ways and shapes and forms. It's the small things too. It's mental suffering, it's physical suffering, it's psychological suffering, it's emotional suffering. We even have suffering in our spiritual life, right? So when we say suffering, don't just think like, oh, someone hit me and that's physical suffering, but it's the mental things too. It's the disappointments that we have. It's when we are judging, when we're complaining, when we are reacting negatively, when we're thinking, when we're whatever it is, right? It's the subtle things. But that's why we also practice mindfulness very often. That's why we meditate. Is that way we can watch our mind. We can see how our mind is working. We can see what things come up as we're meditating, right? Because Buddhism is a mind-centered religion. It's here to teach you how your mind works so you can pinpoint some of those bad things, right, and eliminate them out of your life. I always give the example that when we're meditating to always label things, right? Every time we do a meditation for meditation class, the main object is whatever topic we're discussing for that day. But as you're meditating, if thoughts arise or you get distracted, instead of giving a story for that distraction, right? Sometimes we're meditating and the phone rings or the door opens or you hear something or you feel something. Instead of creating a story and entertaining that thought and asking yourself, oh, who opened the door? Who are they? Why are they late? Why are they ruining my meditation session, right? You create a whole false story when really
it's just a door. It's just a sound, right? So accept it as what it is. So if you are meditating or whatever, and you hear the door open, just give it a quick label, sound or door, whatever comes up first, right? If you're hungry, don't run after the thoughts of, what am I going to eat? Do I want to go out to eat? Do I want to order in? Do I want to cook? Do I have all the ingredients, right? Don't entertain those thoughts. Simply just acknowledge what the truth distraction is, which is hunger or food, right? Give it that label. And as you do that over time, you start creating this trend chart of discern things that arise during meditation, right? Because you're labeling things, so you're able to group them together over time. And as you group them over time, then you can see the specific things that cause you distraction or cause you suffering during meditation or throughout the day. And so as you see those specific things, then you're able to tackle it in real life, right? If it's a certain person, maybe you have to unfriend them, maybe you have to distance yourself from them. If it's a job, maybe you have to change a job or just work better or harder. If it's a place, then whatever it is, right? But at least now you have something you have something that you can grasp and know what to do with, right? Versus just saying, I don't know why I'm unhappy. I don't know why I'm depressed. I don't know why I'm always angry. You do know, you just don't want to acknowledge it, right? Because we're scared. We're afraid of the unknown. We're afraid to truly see how we are or how other people may see us, right? And so we push things back. We hide them away. We put them in a box in our mind and we lock it up, right? But that's not doing anything because it's still there, right? You're not allowing it to be. So as things arise in life, as you have thoughts of, oh, I want this, or I want that, or this should be like this, or that should be like this, or whatever it may be, you can stop and ask yourself, why? Where is this coming from? Why do I feel like this? Right? What kind of suffering is this? What can I do to stop this suffering? Right? So one thing about Buddhism is that it's a questioning practice, right? There's a lot of religions out there where it's like taboo to question things, right? It's taboo to question what's written in the sacred texts. And if you ask questions, then you're a heathen and you're expelled from life or something. I don't know. But here, at least in the Buddhist practice, it's good to ask questions, right? Because you do want to find the truth. And the truth is there for you. But we have to work toward it. We have to work to find out the truth, right? We can't just sit down, meditate one time, and all of a sudden we're Zen masters. You can't just come to the temple and chant with us and listen to Dharma talks, and all of a sudden you're a better person. No, you're not actively doing something, right? You're just passively listening. You're just passively chanting. You need to actively apply what you hear and what you read and what you do in life. That's the only way you're going to learn. That's the only way you're going to be able to change yourself, to change change your minds, right? Like working out, you have to constantly work out in order to build muscle, right? You can't just go to the gym one time and all of a sudden you're a bodybuilder, right? So you can't just meditate one time and all of a sudden you're a Zen master. You actually have to do it constantly, right? It takes time, it takes effort, it takes patience. But we live in a world where we want 2-day shipping, 1-day shipping. You want constant gratification, right? We're an impatient generation, unfortunately. But if we're able to allow ourselves to have patience and to learn and have those ups and downs in life, and especially in our spiritual practice, then over time we will see the fruits of our practice, right? It's not going to be easy, obviously. Nothing in life is easy, and it shouldn't. But failure is good. That's how you learn, right? If you fail at something, then you know next time what not to do. And it may take a couple of tries. You may not recognize these desires right away. You may not recognize the subtle ones right away. But as you practice being mindful of what you do and how you think and what you say and the things around you, then it's easier to catch those things a little bit quicker. I always say it's obviously difficult to be mindful 24/7, but if you practice slowly in small quantities, then over time it becomes a regular habit, right? So I always say, as you leave the temple and you're walking to your car, be mindful of your walk. Be mindful of the path that you're walking on. Be mindful of how your feet feel as you walk. Be mindful of what you're stepping on. Be mindful of your surroundings. Be mindful of opening the door. Be mindful of turning on the car. Be mindful of driving out of the parking lot, right? Our life is so automatic that we get up in the morning, we get ready, we go to work, we come back home, and we don't even remember leaving the house to go to work in the first place because everything is done automatically. It's a habit, right? You aren't able to enjoy life if you do that. That's why for monks and nuns we have 52 gathas, or little mantras that we do throughout the day for specific things that we do. So when we wake up, there's a mantra that we recite. When we change our clothes, there's a mantra we recite. When we brush our teeth, when we shower, when we put our robes on, when we walk, when we cook, when we clean, any activity that we do, there's a mantra. Why? To help us recognize and be mindful of what we're doing. That way you're able to enjoy what you're doing. It sounds dumb or mundane to enjoy doing the dishes, but if you actually put awareness to what you're doing, then you can enjoy the water that's flowing, the soap that's cleaning, right? You can enjoy those little subtle mundane things if you're aware of it. So as you practice slowly and being mindful of smaller things, right, then it'll accumulate over time, and as you do things regularly, it'll become more habitual to be mindful and to enjoy the little things that we do. And as you do that, then you can start not just being mindful of the external things that you're doing, but the internal mental things that's happening in your mind, right? So every time you're judging, or you're complaining, or you're desiring for something to happen or not happen, or whatever it is, it's easier for you to recognize that quicker, easier, and to eventually do something about it. You can ask yourself, is this a good thought? Is this a good desire? Is this going to benefit me? Is this going to benefit others as well? Is it going to hurt me? Is it going to hurt others? Is it a good practice? Is it a bad practice? Is it a good thought process, or is it not a good thought process, right? As long as we are able to recognize that some of these desires will ultimately not cause us happiness, right? Because that's essentially what these desires tend to want to do to us. Having the bigger house, the nicer car, the bigger job, the fancier title, all these desires we assume will bring us happiness. But for how long? You get a big house, and after a while, like, it's not big enough, I want a bigger house, right? You get a new car, but after a month, a year or two, you want a newer car. Every year there's a new iPhone. Every year you get a new iPhone, right? So clearly it's not causing you as much happiness as you thought it would, right? So when you're able to recognize that and see that, then it's easier to not want those things. It's easier to see that those are not happiness. Happiness, true happiness, is freedom of desires. Freedom of those desires that will not cause you happiness, ultimately. Right? Okay, I've overspoken as usual. But the quicker we're able to release those expectations of the desires that we want in the world, within ourselves and those around us, the easier it will be for us to stop arguing and wishing that things were different or be different than what they are, right? So when reality catches up to our false expectations, don't fight it, right? Because that's what happens typically. Things don't happen the way we want them, so we try different ways to make it happen versus just accepting that it is what it is, right? Okay, I'm gonna stop there. I've already spoken too much. So, as I mentioned, through the next sessions, we'll continue down the line of the Four Noble Truths, because every other teaching in Buddhism stems from the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths gives us Eightfold Path, which gives us the 12 links of dependent origination, which gives us the practice of meditation, and then the full understanding of karma, right? Those are the foundations of Buddhist practice. So if there's anything you ever read on Buddhism, read the Four Noble Truths. That is the Bible of Buddhism, if we had one. Okay. Any questions, concerns, emotional outbursts? Okay. Then we will go ahead and transfer the merit and go into chanting. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha, Namo Shakyamuni Buddha, Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. For any positive karmic action we've accumulated here today, we wish to transfer the merit to all sentient beings and wish them full enlightenment. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha.
you.